Good day, everyone. My name is Varun Kaur, Executive Director of the AAPI Victory Alliance, and I'm so pleased to have a lot of you on the call today to hear about a lot of the exciting changes that are going on in the great state of Alaska. I recently did a visit up there to get an understanding of a lot of these changes that are going on, and I was just frankly shocked and pleasantly surprised about a lot of the great trends that the state is experiencing. And I met some great folks, and they're all on the Zoom today. And so I'm just so very excited to kind of dive in. But first, with some background on the AAPI Victory Alliance, we are the largest 501c4 AAPI grassroots organization in the country. Obviously, we are staunchly progressive. And we were founded in 2017 by the former commissioners of the White House Initiative for AAPIs, which was reauthorized under President Biden earlier this year. And just a few days ago, it was announced that U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai and HHS Secretary Javier Becerra are co-chairing this initiative and should be announcing any day now the incoming commissioners serving the current term. And so with that background that and lineage that we've had in the early days of the AAPI Victory Alliance, we started to flex our muscle and engage with AAPIs around the country 24/7, 365, agnostic of election, focused primarily on communicating with the AAPI community as citizens, and not as voters, but as citizens, and to impart to them information on civil discourse, on policy. And of course, we had a lot to fight against during the Trump years. So that's our background. With that, I wanted to maybe just dive right in and introduce several of our speakers today. And first, it's my honor and privilege to introduce Senator Scott Kawasaki, who started serving in a public office in a very young age. In fact, I think he was one of the first, the youngest rather, legislators in the state when I think he first got elected Fairbanks City Council at the age of 24. And he's been serving as a senator representing the Fairbanks area since 2018. And so it's my honor and privilege to introduce Senator Scott Kawasaki.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Varun. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of a history of my, I guess, rise into political office. I was born in Tokyo. My parents were there teaching under like the Japanese English teaching program during the 70s. So I was born there. My mother is from Hawaii. She's Chinese, born in Hawaii. She's third generation Chinese. My father was born in Stockton, California. He's third generation Japanese. So I'm a fourth generation American, born in Tokyo, but didn't learn the language. And I wish I had. Sadly, I didn't get to have that knowledge going in. So I was raised here. We moved up to Alaska. My parents studied at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. They had a great program for graduate school. And so that's why they studied up in Alaska, had friends here, bought a house here. It's the house I live in right now. And they decided that they wanted to raise children up here. So in 1980, I was raised up here, moved up here, raised up here, and raised up here. And then, so that's why I'm here in Alaska. Today it's 9 o'clock in Fairbanks, Alaska. It's 35 below. And sometimes I ask why I'm still up here, but I love Alaska, and Alaska has been a great place to live, work, and play. And I think that's why a lot of people are up here in Alaska right now. I could just say that I served in the city council right out of college. I ran in '99. I was elected to the city council. I then, right after the city council, I was elected to the state house. And then 3 years ago, I ran for the state senate. I ran against a very conservative president. And I won that Senate seat. And so I serve here now in the state Senate in the state of Alaska with a total of 15 years now. Alaska has been a great place to live, work, raise a family. And I think a lot of the things that we talk about when we're talking about the Asian Americans is crucial to developing the Alaska electorate. I could say that when I first ran, I started to campaign at some of the Korean churches because there's a pretty prevalent Korean population here in Fairbanks. I first had one of my first literature pieces was in Korean. I think I was the only person to have a piece that was written in Korean. I then had one also in Tagalog. We have a pretty prevalent population up here in Fairbanks. So we know Alaska is one of the details of the most Asian cities in Alaska. Kodiak has 41% Asian, and actually there's a state legislator from Hawaii who was born in Kodiak, who actually serves in the state legislature in Hawaii right now. Ketchikan has 12.5%. Anchorage has 9.4%. Sitka has 7%. Juneau has 6.5%. Fairbanks at 4.3%. We're a growing population, especially in Anchorage, where we've seen a big growth rate in the recent years of immigrants to the east side of Anchorage, and those folks are really, they're voters. They vote strongly, they vote with their convictions, and have really changed elections. I know that a lot of candidates like me tend to go to those folks to talk to them, to make sure that they're engaged and active in elections. And so in Alaska, we've seen that rise. I'll also say for folks that are online that it's important that Alaska is seen as a place that we can change elections, because it's, I was just talking to the Attorney General in New York City, who decided not to run for governor, but she was talking to me about how much her campaign was going to cost as far as an election goes. And elections cost so much more money in the lower 48 than they do here in Alaska. And so we can turn elections very quickly, very easily, with very small contributions. So again, I'll be online for the rest of the time here. I just wanted to thank everybody for being online today, and thank you, Varun, for the invitation today. I'm going to get some tea. I've got a little bit of a cold. It's 35 below, but I just wanted to thank everybody who's online today, and thanks to the other speakers who are there.
Thank you so much, Senator. Appreciate that. And I know we're going to be diving in and getting a little more inquisitive with some questions a little later on, but take care of yourself in the meantime. Next, it's also my honor and privilege to introduce Ryan Schriver, who is the director of Progress Alaska, which is a progressive donor alliance in the state. And like a lot of folks in Alaska who have their own sort of origin story, Ryan, I think it might be great for the listeners to also know what brought you to the state, not being a native yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Varun, so much for having me. And yeah, similar to the senator who shared some great words about what a unique and really marvelous place Alaska is to get to call home. I had no idea what to expect when a phone rang one day and somebody asked me if I'd consider taking a job in Alaska, but my girlfriend at the time, now wife, and I decided to make the jump and to try it out, to see what an adventure in Alaska could look like. And hitting the ground here, it immediately became apparent that this was a very exciting place to be working in politics. It was an exciting place to be doing community organizing, and it was just an exciting place to live. And it turns out that a lot of people from the lower 48 who are coming to visit or coming on a 1 or 2 year adventure to live in Alaska were having the same realization. And as a result, we've started to see the demographics and the politics of Alaska shifting in a relatively pronounced way that I'm going to go into in a little bit here. I do want to point out that Senator Kawasaki started his presentation the way everybody from Fairbanks does, which is to tell you how cold it is. And he ended the way that everybody from Fairbanks does, which is to remind you how cold it is. And really, that's just a way to flex on their friends down here in Anchorage, where we have a degree. Today it is 1 degree at my house, which I guess is 36 more than Senator Kawasaki has. So we get it. Y'all are a little tougher than us, but such it is. So I'm going to take that leap of faith here now, where I attempt to share my screen and try not to fumble the whole thing. So, just one more second here. All right, can folks see my screen here? Great. So we're going to be walking through the case for Alaska. I want to give a shout out to our friends at the Movement Voter Project who helped make these slides look really pretty for a presentation we did together a while ago. This is far beyond my normal graphic design skills. So, loved the Movement Voter Project. We talked a little bit about my background. I've been doing community organizing and grassroots organizing for about 15 years now, the last 10 years or so here in Alaska. Back in 2010, I was asked to take the reins of a nascent organization called Progress Alaska that is a donor table donor alliance, where we are aggregating wealth both from in-state donors as well as support from the lower 48 to inject in programs, projects, and campaigns that would not otherwise happen. So we're still a relatively new operation. We don't have a big public profile, but I think we're starting to see some big change on the landscape. As Varun and Senator Kawasaki have both implied, there is kind of a notion of what people think about when they think of Alaska. And you might be thinking of Sarah Palin, our incredible wildlife, maybe just some of the other natural beauty we have here, or maybe it's the stereotypical conservative gun-toting guy that actually the person we're looking at on the right of the screen there is our good governor, Governor Dunleavy. I use those terms very generously. But the reality is that Alaska's got a lot of different stuff going on. And part of what makes it unique is just the size and the scale and the scope of the landscape here. We have a huge amount of land, but relatively few people, which allows us to have different relationships with our neighbors and with our community than many folks in the lower 48 do. And part of that can be because communities may be only accessible by plane or by boat, or even dog sled sometimes of year. And that helps people bond together and create strong community bonds that allow us to do some different things politically and to have real conversations with our neighbors. It also means that we have people concentrated along what we call the road system, and Anchorage being an anchor city for the state, there is a lot of change that is being driven out of the Anchorage areas and other urban centers right now. And so we have a concentrated population that we can do really great organizing work in. And then all around the rest of the state, we have communities where everybody knows their neighbor and everybody can have a real conversation. So, when it comes to thinking about what Alaska really is today, I think it's really important that everybody gets some of those stereotypes out of their head. The most recent census revealed some really interesting data on the trends that we're seeing. And so I'm not going to go through and read all of these, but 40% of Alaskans are identifying as non-white. A significant percentage of those being from Alaska Native and Indigenous populations. We're seeing the changes being driven all across the state, as the senator was highlighting, of growing AAPI communities and communities like Kodiak, where we have 40% AAPI voters. This is not just an Anchorage thing, but we are seeing a lot of change in Anchorage, as you see on the bottom two bullet points there, or the second to last bullet point. We have an extraordinarily diverse public school district, and it's an important point because as these diverse populations graduate up and out of our school system, they're the next voters, they're the next leaders of Alaska. And if we start investing in infrastructure and projects and programs now that can support and connect with these communities, we are undoubtedly going to be driving and seeing a lot of change in our state. And then I'd also point out that we're an incredibly young state. For a couple of different reasons, but we're following just on the heels of Utah in terms of the overall youthful demographics of the state, and that's in part because there's a lot of young people who want to come here and check it out, and we're trying to make this a place where more and more young people want to stay, and so that is something that we're working to address to build some long-term power here. And these major demographic shifts are leading to a more purple environment than I think many political operatives recognize in Alaska. We have a bipartisan majority that has been holding power in our state legislature, a Democratic-led, a progressive-led bipartisan majority that's been holding the gavels in Juneau, that has been crucial in terms of stopping some of the conservatives' most evil and aggressive agenda items. Prior to that, we had a Democratic-led bipartisan majority in our state Senate. So we have this interesting dynamic where at the state legislative level, we are seeing that increasing diversity and political diversity that is being demonstrated in the actual political makeup. And I will point out, since I don't have any other slides talking about our state legislature, and maybe this is something the senator could elaborate on later, but we had a pitched battle to hold that bipartisan majority in our state house this last election cycle. And the progressive community really rallied around that as our overarching goal. We coordinated resources, and we actually picked up 2 progressive leaning House districts in order to hold that bipartisan majority. And there could be somebody out there to correct me, I could be wrong about this, but I believe that it's the only place in the nation carried by Trump where progressives picked up seats at the local legislative level. So there is change being made. And it's part of a longer term and significant shift here. So Alaska has changed its overall, has shifted more than almost any other state in terms of its presidential vote share over the last 20 years. And so we didn't shift quite as much as Vermont that you'll see on the far left there, but Vermont was obviously starting from a place where it was already a liberal state. Alaska, in terms of its vote share shift, we were starting from a more conservative leaning state. We have more ground to make up, but we are rapidly increasing the Democratic vote share statewide, especially in presidential elections. And I would note here that in 2020, Biden increased the Clinton vote performance by almost a full point over the national average of vote share increase. This slide is just showing you the data in a kind of a different way, but you see here on the purple line that Alaska is trending steadily towards higher and higher Democratic presidential vote share. And so we need to keep those trends going, and we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to accelerate those changes. Because if we do, we're going to start to see victories. After 2 terms of overtly progressive mayors in Anchorage, we unfortunately lost a squeaker, in the COVID environment, and backlash around community shutdowns and a few other things going on at the municipal level. We lost by like 1,000 votes, and those are elections that have consequences. We have almost 40+% of the state's population living in Anchorage, and so these races are a big deal. And we need to make sure that we're investing in the infrastructure and the organizing campaigns to ensure that we are winning these close elections. This next election cycle, we have Governor Genevieve up for re-election. He was elected on a relatively narrow margin, and we should, be doing everything we can to make sure that voters remember some of the wildly unpopular decisions that he's made while in office. We're going to talk a little bit more about that election environment, but one note here is that when we're talking about these percentage points, we're often talking about, even on the statewide level, very, very small numbers. And so, this is an image that's left over from some pre-election polling that had been done, but polling consistently showed Donald Trump was slightly underwater leading up to the election, right before, we saw the kind of like late nationwide swings back in favorability for him. And the Trump campaign has acknowledged after the campaign that Alaska was one of the states that they were closely monitoring and watching, because even though percentage point wise, they were running a few points ahead, really we're only talking about 36,000 votes here. And we're not talking about needing to flip enormous numbers of votes in order to make a difference in statewide elections. And the way we're starting to do that is with strong partner groups on the ground. This is in no way, shape, or form a comprehensive list of all of the great groups that are out there doing hard work in Alaska, but we have a core group of progressive entities that are driving change. They're working in the trenches day in and day out, and it's starting to make a difference. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support that overall infrastructure. And I believe that the AAPI Victory Fund can be an important piece of that landscape. And so Progress Alaska and other groups are working to increase the capacity for issue campaigns. We're working on building a communications hub. We're working on building America Votes and State Voices style C3 and C4 state tables, and looking at increasing and enhancing the overall funding landscape here. And we're doing this stuff at a breakneck pace. We're working as fast and as hard as we possibly can because we've got a ton up on the ballot this election cycle. We talked about that bipartisan majority in the state house. We've got new districts that we think are, at least right now, manageable and winnable, and there's a path to preserving that bipartisan majority. Depending on how things shake out in the Senate with some lawsuits over our redistricting, we might have some competitive campaigns there to give Senator Kawasaki some additional friends to hang out with and pass good policy. We've got a US Senate race where we've got Kelly Shabaka, a Trump-endorsed candidate, taking on Senator Murkowski from the right, but all of that taking place in an environment where there are no longer closed primaries. Lisa Murkowski no longer has to worry about being taken out in a Republican primary. If she's one of the top 4 vote getters, the top 4 vote getters, regardless of whether we're talking a statewide election or a state house election, will advance to the general election where voters will use ranked choice voting to determine the ultimate winner. And so that landscape shift is a big deal. It's a big deal in the governor's race. And then on top of those competitive, interesting statewide races and the battle for the state house, we've also got a really important ballot initiative related to tribal recognition at the state level. And we've got a huge fight on our hands to make sure that citizens do not vote to host a constitutional convention where delegates could actually rip up our very progressive and strong existing constitution and start over again in order to enact more radical right-wing agendas. So we've got a lot riding on the next year in front of us, and we're doing everything we can to build up that infrastructure right away. So with that, I'll say thank you and hand it back to Varun.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And so Ryan and the senator gave an overall picture of the macro trends that are shaping the state and its near-term future. And I wanted to get a little bit more narrow by introducing Genevieve Mina, who I got to know after my visit up to Alaska a few months ago. And every state in the country deserves at least one Genevieve Mina, in that she is this uber organizer, this grassroots powerhouse. And I'm just so excited to introduce her, because I think the rest of the folks in the lower 48 need to know who Genevieve is and all the great work that she's been doing, frankly, for her, for her career. So with that, I wanted to introduce Genevieve, you to the AAPI Victory Alliance participants. And if you could just tell us a little bit about what's going on in the state in terms of the AAPI changes that you're seeing.
For sure, and thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to just be talking to folks on the call. I recognize some folks. Hi, Eric. Haven't seen you in a while. My name's Genevieve Mina. I use she, her pronouns. I am calling in Anchorage on Denina lands, and I can give a quick intro on myself. I am a lifelong Alaskan, a community advocate, and a political activist, and I've been involved since 2015 in politics, and prior to that, I had no interest at all in politics. My family immigrated to Alaska from the Philippines in the late 80s and the early 90s. They're all first-generation immigrants. I'm the only one in my family who is born here in Alaska. I was born and raised in Anchorage. I went to all of those diverse public schools that Ryan and Senator Kawasaki were talking about, and those were also the most diverse schools in the nation a couple of years ago, which is really neat. And so I've been really privileged and grateful to grow up in an environment where, at least in my high school, APIs were the majority minority. And for me, my political involvement began when a friend just recruited me to a local mayoral race to volunteer. But beyond that, my personal background is pretty conventional and common for a lot of APIs who are in Alaska, where we're not really involved in politics. There are a lot of families that are involved in the community, whereas in their churches or in different cultural groups, but not necessarily in a voting and activism space. And so currently I am involved in the Democratic Party. I'm the president of the Alaska Young Democrats. I've also worked as an aide for elected officials in the assembly and in the legislature. And I also serve on a couple of the boards of the organizations that Ryan talked about, including with the Alaska Center that works on GOTV efforts in a C3 and a C4 organizing space. So involved in a lot of the different pockets that are intersecting in this conversation related to getting APIs involved in voter engagement. But beyond that, I'm not speaking on behalf of any of those organizations. I am just talking about my personal experience being in this space as an API woman for a while. So I did mock up a quick slideshow, and it's not super detailed in terms of words. It just had it has a lot of pictures to help visualize APIs in Alaska. And it only has 3 slides. All right, so APIs in Alaska, I can talk a little bit on the background of API organizing. So APIs have been in Alaska for hundreds and hundreds of years. Filipinos were actually in Alaska around the, I wanna say the 18th century. And a lot of that history is because of fish processing plants and seasonal workers that have been in this state for a very long time, particularly in the Filipino community. And APIs are the backbone of a lot of our labor workers and a lot of our churches, as I was talking about. We have been involved in organizing, and a lot of that has revolved around cultural spaces and community spaces. And so I featured a couple of those organizations here. The Filipino community in Juneau, for example, which is in our state capital, has existed in 1929, and they're still active today. The Japanese American Citizens League has done a lot of C3 voter engagement and cultural educational work. And there are a lot of different organizations that are focused on service, where you'll find a lot of API community groups. So I was part of the Mabuhay Lions Club, for example. There are also organizations such as Bridge Builders, which ties in a lot of different cultural groups outside of the API community that was featured here in Anchorage. And there are like numerous other cultural groups that I would name here that are involved, but they're focused on gathering together. They do a little bit of like basic voter education or familiarity, but it's not really the focus and the heart of those organizations. The one other photo that I included here in this slide is Thelma Balco, and I just love talking about her because she was the first Filipina American legislator who was elected in office in the nation and elected, I believe, in 1974. And so it is not a new thing to have APIs in office and involved politically. There's a lot of potential there, and I'm just excited about moving forward and seeing what that looks like in this current space. So this next slide here is talking a little bit about this newer form of API activism that I've been really humbled to be involved in over the past couple of years. And the first stage of this is in 2017 with Anchorage NAPOF, the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. This group started out of the Kavanaugh hearings in 2017, and NAPOF had an effort to reach out to states that had senators who were involved in that critical vote. And so they had pretty much blankly reached out to folks who knew people in Alaska to see like, hey, do you know any APIs? We would love to send them to DC to help organize and testify. And so this group of folks on the bottom right is the cohort that we had to basically lobby on behalf of NAPOF and on behalf of pro-choice API women in the state of Alaska to Senator Murkowski. And for me personally, that was the first time that I'd ever been involved in organizing and politics, but through my identity as an API woman. Prior to that, it had just been being involved in politics. So that was an incredible experience to be a part of. And through that specific effort, we were really, really grateful to have the support of the national organization to continue the group that had convened in 2017. And so we founded a chapter in Anchorage NAPOF, and we hosted a couple of different events. And so a lot of Anchorage NAPOF and how we had been organizing and working together ties in a lot of the history of APIs in Alaska. So focusing on just building ties and building friendships, because the experience of being an API in Alaska is that there are a lot of us, but we don't necessarily connect and identify with each other through our identities as API people. And that can be for a lot of different reasons. We don't have a lot of the enclaves in other communities in the nation. It's normal, I guess, for me, yeah, at least growing up, to be API. So it wasn't necessarily something that we talked about as part of the conversation, but to be able to create a space for API people that had never existed before was such a new experience for a lot of people and across the state. So we had dinners, had meetings. On the bottom left, that was an event that we held at the Korean community here in Anchorage to celebrate Lunar New Year, talk about our experiences as API people, talk about the model minority myth, and then I think we threw in voting in there too. So that was the organizing effort of Anchorage NAPOF. And last, I'll transition to the current state of API organizing right now. So from Anchorage NAPOF, we continue to grow, and we realized that a lot of our gatherings were starting to grow outside of the space of specifically pro-choice centered organizing, and instead became more of this urgency and need to be around API people and just exist. And so we created our own group called AAPI at the beginning of last year, which stands for Alaska Asian Pacific American Desi Americans. We're not filed as any type of nonprofit or anything. We're just a grassroots group that meets up every month via Zoom, and we try to just connect with each other. Sometimes we've hosted community dialogues. Last year we did a Secret Santa, which was fun. And it's really great because like Ryan was talking about, and Senator Kawasaki as well, the demographics for API, especially when you live in urban centers like Anchorage, are huge, but there are also APIs that live in Fairbanks, that live in Kodiak, and live in other communities, but there simply just aren't the numbers to be able to have a club or a space to meet up with them. So having this Zoom across the state on a regular basis has really been a fantastic refuge and space for a lot of folks to talk about organizing, activism, etc. And additionally, the reason why a lot of us really value this space is because we felt like we didn't really fit in the traditional and the historic different API community groups that some of us may be involved in, but those groups weren't necessarily political. And a lot of those groups tend to shy away from specific political activism, talking about candidates, talking about issues, and being more outspoken about issues. So we are just really grateful to continue organizing on this space. And what's great is that there have been other groups and other individuals who have gotten more involved and who have been inspired to create their own communities. So for example, Nesian Lounge, oh, I misspelled lounge, so please disregard that. But Nesian Lounge was founded by a couple of members in AAPI who created their own Polynesian and Micronesian and other Pacific Islander groups, and create their own monthly Zoom as well, because those spaces didn't exist for the Pacific Islander community. So the new API landscape right now is created with a lot of intention. It's been created with a lot of organic interest from API Alaskans who have been born here and grown up in this space. And we are just grateful to continue to grow, learn from each other, and connect with each other. So thank you for letting me present. And I will also just be on this call and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Genevieve, and I appreciate all our speakers today providing that sort of stage and the landscape analysis. We have time for a few questions, and so if any of the participants wanted to just pop those into the chat, we'll tee those up. And I have maybe a question or two to start. And Genevieve, you had mentioned about this history and almost legacy, if you will, of the the first Filipino American in the 70s being in the Alaska State Legislature. And so I'm going to maybe start with the senator and ask, because when you first got elected, there was not much representation, API representation in the state. Can you talk a little bit about that change? And then Ryan and Genevieve, if you wanted to maybe comment on that as well. Are we starting to see some changes? Or do we need to be much more intentional about actually actively recruiting folks in the future? Senator?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. She was one of the authors of the original Civil Rights Act in Alaska. Alaska was, I think we had a Civil Rights Act before the United States and before many of the other states had actually done one. And it was because of her leadership and because of our state at the time was a almost entirely Democratic state at the point that we were able to pass one. So I think that her strength in passing that was something that made it happen. I also wanted to mention just a couple of other things just on statistics that Ryan mentioned that, the Senate is 7 Democrats and 13 Republicans right now. And the reason why we didn't organize until the day before session started was because there's actually 13 Republicans were split on whether they should coalition with Democrats or coalition with the rest of the Republican Party. And that's something that's close. I mean, that is really close. It's what happened back in the 2008 timeframe, 2006 timeframe. And also in Fairbanks, I'll just mention that Fairbanks elected an entirely Democratic group to the Assembly, to the City Council, and to the school board, which was hotly contested this year, as school boards are in other communities. We win on the issues, and when people hear our issues, they hear that what we're going to bring to the table. Progressives win on all of those on all those levels. So whether it's school board or city council or borough assemblies, we win those races. We do plan on winning some races this year in the state house and at the state senate level too. So I think that it's reachable. It's very, very reachable. Appreciated Ryan's input on that, and I think we're moving forward.
Great. Ryan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just piggyback onto the response there and back to the original question. One of the things that really jumps out to me in the landscape right now is that even though you heard all of these statistics about the increasing racial diversity of the Alaskan electorate, we actually aren't seeing that play out in our elected officials. And that is a direct result of the fact that we haven't been investing in our communities of color from the progressive side in the way that we should be. And so, we as a progressive community need to recognize that, and we need to start supporting and working with and enhancing the work of groups that are doing organizing on the ground in Fairbanks and Anchorage and Kodiak and Juneau and every place else. And it's got to be, it's not like a one-stop shop. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We know we need organizing support in the Indigenous community, in the Latino community, in the AAPI community. We have a lot of work to do because right now communities of color are woefully underrepresented compared to their overall demographics in the state.
And then if I may add quickly, sorry to interrupt. The one other thing I wanted to mention is that APIs have been involved politically, like a lot of the different community groups host political forums, candidate forums, etc. But it's been more from a very, very nonpartisan basis, I've noticed. And it seems like there is a lot of reticence towards being more involved on specific issues. So on one hand, it's great because there is a strong relationship with many API communities and our congressional delegation, for example, which are all Republicans in the Congress. But at the same time, there just hasn't been that next step for what the new stage of activism looks like in the community.
Yeah, wonderful. I wanted to take this opportunity to recognize Jean Kwan, the former mayor of Oakland, is on our call. We're so excited to have you. Jean, did you want to ask your question, or did you want me to mention it myself?
Sure, if I could just ask it. As you may know, I was the first mayor of a major American city to be elected by ranked choice. And I think ranked choice helps minorities and helps women candidates. So I'm excited for you. I spent a lot of the last election cycle getting Asian Americans around the country organized into language phone banks in places like Philadelphia and Georgia and Texas, as well as California. So it doesn't seem to me, though, that you have a lot of Chinese or other non-English speaking immigrants. Looks like you have Southeast Asians, Japanese Americans, and Filipinos who speak English. So that's may not be something that we could help you with. So I wanted to know what you did want us to do. We could certainly help raise some money and help raise some profiles. We could help get phone bankers who could help explain ranked choice, maybe. So those are my questions.
Ryan, did you want to maybe address that, and anybody else if they wanted to jump in?
I was hoping you were going to do it, but sure, I'll take a stab. You know, I think that when I look across the board, there are two ways that our friends in the lower 48 can really help us accelerate the change we're striving for. The first is with some of that distance grassroots organizing that you're talking about. We had great support in the last cycle with, you know, postcards and phone calls coming in from volunteers in the lower 48. But I think that we need to do that with a much more culturally competent lens than the one size fits all models that we've used in the past. And so I think there's a ton of potential there. I also think there's a ton of potential to learn from some of the situations or some of the places that have used ranked choice voting. And so obviously your particular experience might be very relevant to the conversations here. And we should look at how we can get that experience imparted onto Alaskan communities. And then the third piece, and you know, I would be fired from my job as the donor table director if I didn't say we need resources. Alaska is not blessed with large amounts of progressive wealth here. You know, we rely and we're working with our friends in the lower 48 to help build up our infrastructure and to help increase the strength of our programs. And so Varun and AAPI Victory Fund looking at doing work in Alaska, like that's work that needs to be supported and be supported at a robust level. There's a ton of work to do. Genevieve highlighted that there is an existing landscape and community, particularly on the C3 side, but she also highlighted the fact that we haven't been as political in some of these spaces as we need to. But to do that and do that well, we're going to need resources. And so that's going to take everybody lifting together to get where we need to go.
Yeah, and Gene, I think that, you know, it was mentioned, Genevieve actually mentioned it too, that ESL is important. We do have ballots that are in different languages. We have, I don't know, maybe a dozen or more different languages, but it's really important to get out to those folks in a grassroots movement. You know, one of the things that there was a Republican in East Anchorage who oftentimes really campaigned her heart out and wrote everything in Tagalog, and it was great. And I'll just say that the mistake that I made my first campaign was I did something in Spanish, and I had a Spanish teacher at the university write it for me, and everybody got that piece. And everybody was like, what the heck is this? This is terrible. Because it was written in Spanish, like very, very conventional written Spanish instead of like regular how you would speak to a person. And so I think that is important too. So when writers write postcards to folks that are up here, it really needs to be written in a real common language, common verbiage type situation where everybody can understand it and like sort of you know, understand it and get it. Thanks for the question.
Genevieve, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the other thing that is important with organizing with the API community that hasn't quite happened fruitfully is gaining trust. And that's a conversation that I had when, so a couple of years ago, I realized that one of my godmothers is Elsa Sargento, who's a very prominent Filipino organizer in the state for a long time and helped founded Bridge Builders in the 90s. And I was having a conversation with her about like, what does it mean to have our Filipino community be more involved? And she really emphasized how important trust is in these communities and that trust takes time. But unfortunately, with the resources and the groups that we have right now, a lot of the time, the only groups that can engage with these groups are only during the election cycles. And so without an organization that fills that niche for year-round organizing and developing relationships and building that trust, I think there's a gap that could be supplemented with Taglish and other partnerships with groups that already exist, because our leaders and our elders, they are doing the work, but building more partnerships and relationships is really important for them to be a part of that conversation and at the table.
Yeah, that's so important, Genevieve. Thank you for mentioning that those inherent relationships are key to success. Absolutely. So we're just about out of time. I think we may be able to sneak in another question. If anybody has one, please pop that into the chat now. And while I'm waiting on a question potentially, I did want to mention that in terms of the API Victory Alliance, and our conversations with these three great speakers and several others as well, we're talking about how we could be a little bit more actively involved in the state and even potentially launch a new organization that does year-round organizing. And that's key. And I want to emphasize year-round organizing is not typically done alone by candidates. This is separate from what candidates do, which are, typically they prop up their campaign apparatus and then they tear down their campaign apparatus. And what we are talking about is, not only game changing in terms of the state of Alaska potentially, but elsewhere where the API Victory Alliance hopes to help not only launch new API C4s in the future, but also support existing ones. And so that is our main goal over the next several years, is to create this ecosystem of year-round organizing for APIs in pivotal states around the country. And I would solidly place the state of Alaska in that pivotal category for all the reasons that were mentioned by these three speakers, but also, of course, why should someone, in the lower 48 care, is because we're going to have likely tight Senate maps for the foreseeable future. And the opportunity to flip the state and potentially one, if not two, Senate seats in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm sorry, I just salivate at that challenge from the perspective of our community could play an outsized role in that. And so, yes, absolutely support the great work that Genevieve and Ryan are doing on the ground, support the progressive infrastructure, support the API Victory Alliance. That goes without saying. We give you that pitch every time. But this is why this work is so absolutely vital and needed, because like we proved in the 2020 election in the state of Georgia and Arizona, where many analysts gave our community credit for coming out at 100 to 200% increase in voting since 2016. We have the same opportunity to do this in this state, and no one knows when it's going to happen, but it won't happen unless we do this year-round organizing. So with that, I don't see any other questions in the chat. There's been some great comments, and so please cut and paste if you'd like. We're going to be sending this Zoom out as a recording on our listserv. So send it out to your friends and colleagues. I want to give an opportunity. Anybody, Senator Genevieve, Ryan, or all three, if you wanted to make any closing comments. If not, that's fine too. But I'll open the floor.
I just want to say thank you so much for having me and being part of the conversation. I'm really excited about the direction this is all heading.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you, Varun, for the invitation to speak, and thank you for the participants who are online. Alaska is a place that we're distant from you. It's 35 below outside, but we have a lot of commonalities, and this is a winnable state. There's winnable districts. I just highlighted sort of the 40% in Kodiak. that are recognized as Asian Americans, or the 12.5% in Ketchikan, but that doesn't, and even the 10% in Anchorage, but that doesn't even calculate into the districts. And I think it was Ryan that brought it up, is that some of these districts have really high populated really high populated Asian Americans in particular districts, and that these districts are underrepresented at this point. So these are districts that can be winnable. These are districts that, if there were investments made into the state, would be very inexpensive. And I mentioned that I was talking to the gubernatorial candidate in New York City the other day, and she was saying how much a campaign would cost. And compared to that, Genevieve's been on the campaign trail. She knows campaigns are inexpensive here. We can actually make changes here in Alaska very easily. So thanks for everybody for being on.
Thank you. Genevieve, any last comments?
Yeah, I will just echo what Ryan and Senator Kawasaki said. And also on that last point, this is something that I always hark on just because of all of my political shenanigans, but every vote really does count. And all of us can name many races that have been won and lost in this state by 1 vote, 8 votes, just a handful of votes. So it's a painful memory and recent memory for lots of us, but that's where like even a tiny bit of investment in the AAPI community can make a huge difference, not only for the state and our political makeup, but really in the empowerment of APIs in the state. We're doing the work, and any type of support is just so helpful. And we're just excited to see what goes on next. So thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I wanted to close by saying we probably could have done a 1-hour Zoom just on the relationships between Hawaii and Alaska alone. And we may yet do one on that, because I think I want to do everything we can to continue to accelerate potentially those political connections. But with that, thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. This isn't the last you've heard of this. This is an ongoing project. And if anybody would like to work with us on this project outside of the state, please get in contact with us and our staff. And we very much look forward to continuing this conversation and this great work ahead. Thank you all.